Hi, Freddie. I just found out today that you are actually supposed to be reading a different book, which is fine. The only problem is now I have to finish off Harry Potter on my own because I have to figure out what in the world's happening to him. I know we just got started, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Chapter 6, and I'm already hooked on the book. Um, so we're going to be starting the new one. It's called The Chronicles of Narnia. Um, and for today, I just really hope that we can come up with some characters, the main character at least. And I'm sure we're going to have some supporting characters too. And kind of like in Harry Potter was the main character, and the supporting characters were like Ron, the Weasley twins, um, you know, um, even all the teachers were supporting characters. So hopefully you'll like this book as much as I think you will too. I know I read this when I was younger, but I haven't read it in good 30 years. So it's been a while. All right. The Chronicles of Narnia. Chapter 1, The Wrong Door. This is a story about something that happened long ago, when our grandfather was a child. It was a very important story because it shows how all the comings and goings between our world and the land of Narnia first came. In these days, Sherlock Holmes was still living in Baker Street, and Bastables were looking for treasures in Lewisham Road. In these days, if you were a boy, you had to wear a stiff Akron collar every day, and schools were usually nastier than now. But meals were nicer, and as for sweets, I wouldn't tell you how cheap and how good they were, because it would only make your mouth water in vain. And in these days, they there lived in London a girl called Polly Plummer. She lived in one of the long new houses, which were all joined together. One morning, she was out in the back garden when a boy scrambled up from the garden next door and put his face over the wall. Polly was very surprised because up until now there was never been any children in that house, but only Mr. Ketterley and Mrs. Ketterley, a brother and sister, old bachelor and old maid, living together. So she looked up, full of curiosity. The face of the strange boy was very grubby. It could hardly had been any grubbier if he had first rubbed his hands in the earth and then had a good cry and then dried his face with his hands. As a matter of fact, there was very nearly what had been he had been doing. "Hello," said Polly. "Hello," said the boy. "What's your name?" "Polly," said Polly. "What's yours?" "Digroy," said the boy. "I say, that's a funny name," said Polly. "It isn't half as funny as Polly," said Digroy. "Yes, it is," said Polly. No, it isn't," said Digroy. "At any rate, I do wash my face," said Polly, "which is what you need to do, especially after—" and then she stopped. She had been going to say, "after you've been blubbering." That's another word for crying. But she thought that wouldn't be polite. "All right, I have then," said Digroy, in a much louder voice, like a boy who had been so miserable that he couldn't care who knew he had been crying. "And so would you," he went on, "if you had to live all your life in the country and had a pony and a river at the bottom of the garden, and then been brought to live in this beastly hole like this." "London isn't a hole," said Polly incredibly. But the boy was too wound up to take any notice of her, and he went on. And if your father was away in India and you had to come and live with an aunt and uncle who's mad, who would you like? Um, who would like that? And if the reason was that they were looking after your mother, and if your mother was ill and was going to die, then his face went the wrong sort of shape, as it does if you're trying to keep back your tears. I don't know, I'm sorry, said Polly humbly, and then because she hardly knew what to say, and also to turn Dudley's mind to a cheerful subject, she asked, "Is Mr. Kenroy really mad?" "Well, either he's mad," said Digra, "or there's some other mystery. He has a study up on the top floor, and Aunt Letty says I must never go up there. Well, that looks fishy to begin with. And then there's another thing. Whenever he tries to say anything to me at meal times, he never even tries to talk to her. She's always shut she always shuts him up, she says. Don't worry the boy, Andrew, or I'm sure Digboy doesn't want to hear about that. Or else, now, Digroy, wouldn't you like to go out and play in the garden? What sort of things does he try to say? I don't know. He never gets far enough. But there's more than that. One night, it was last night, in fact, as I was getting past the front of the attic stairs on my way to bed, and I didn't much care for going past them either. I'm sure I heard a yell. Perhaps he keeps a mad wife shut up there. Yes, I thought of that. Or perhaps he's a coiner. Or he might have been a pirate, like the man at the beginning of the Treasure Island, and he always hiding from his old shipmates. How exciting, said Polly. I never knew your house was so interesting. You may think it interesting, said Digroy, but you wouldn't like it if you had to sleep there. How would you like how would you like to lie awake, listen to your Uncle Arthur's step to come creeping along the passage to your room, and he has such awful eyes. That was how Polly and Digroy got to know one another, and as it was just the beginning of the summer holiday, and neither of them was going to the sea that year, they met nearly every day. Their adventures began chiefly because it was one of the wettest and coldest summers they had been for years. They drove them to the indoor thing that drove them to indoor things, you might say, indoor exploration. It was wonderful how much exploring you can do a with a stump of a candle in a big house or in a row of houses. Polly had discovered long ago that if you open a certain little door in the box room attic of her house, you would find the cistern and dark place behind it, which you could get into by a little careful climbing. The dark place was like a long tunnel with brick walls on one side and a sloping roof on the other. In the roof there was little chunks of light between the slats. There was no floor in the tunnel. You had to step from rafter to rafter, and between them there was only plaster. If you stepped on this, you would find yourself falling through the ceiling of the room below. Polly had used that bit the bit of tunnel just because the cistern as a smuggler's cave. She had brought up a bits of old patching cases and the seats of broken kitchen chairs and things of that sort, and spread them across the rafters to rafters, so as to make it a bit of a floor where she kept a cash box containing various treasures and a story that she was writing, and usually a few apples. She had often drank a quiet bottle of ginger beer in there. The old bottles made it look like a smuggler's cave. Um, Dingroy, Digroy quite liked the cave. She wouldn't let him see the story, but he was more interested in exploring. Look here, he said. How long does the tunnel go on for? I mean, does it stop where your house ends? No, said Polly. The walls don't go out of the roof. It goes on. I don't know how far. Then we could get the length of the whole row of houses. So he so we could, said Polly. And I say, what? We could get out into the other houses. Yes, and get taken up for burglars. No thanks. Don't be so jolly clever. Sorry about that. I just got a stupid message from the school board. Uh, okay. Don't be jolly. Don't be a jolly clever. I was thinking of a house beyond yours. What about it? Why, it's the empty one. Dad says it's always been empty ever since we came here. I suppose you ought to have a look at it then, said Digroy. He said he was a good deal more excited um, than you would have thought for the way he spoke. For for of course he was thinking, just as you would have been, of all the reasons why the house might have been empty so long. So was Polly. Neither of them said a word. Haunted, and both felt that once the thing had been suggested, it would be too feeble not to do it. Should we go and try it now? Said Digroy. All right, said Polly. Uh, don't if you uh, don't if you'd rather not, said Digroy. I'm game if you are, she said. How are we to know when we're at the next house but one? Uh, they decided they would have to go out into the box room and walk across to taking steps as long as the steps for from one rafter to the next. That would give them an idea of how many rafters went to a room. Then they would allow about four more for the passage between the two attics in Polly's house, and then the same number for the maid's bedroom as for the box room. That would give them the length of the house, which she had done that distance twice. They would be at the end of the Digroy's house, and any door they came to after that would let them into the attic of the empty house. But but I don't expect it really empty at all, said Digroy. What do you expect? I expect someone lives there um, in secret, only coming in and out at night with a dark lantern. We shall probably discover a gang of desperate criminals and get a reward. It's all rot. It's all not to say our house would be empty all these years unless there was some mystery. Daddy thought it must uh, be the drains, said Polly. Pah, pooh! Grown-ups are always thinking of uninteresting expectations, says Stigroy. Now that they are talking by daylight in the attic instead of by candlelight in the smuggler's cave, it seems they're much less likely that the empty house would be haunted. When they had measured the attic, they had to get a pencil and do a sum. That means adding things together. They both got different amounts to it at first, and even when they agreed, I am not sure we got it right. They were in a hurry to start on the exploration. We must make a sound, said Polly, as they climbed in again behind the cistern. Because it was such an important occasion, they took a candle each. Polly had a good store of these in her cave. It was very dark and dingy and drafty, and they stopped from rafter to rafter without a word, except when they whispered to one another. We're opposite your attic now, or this must be halfway through our house. And neither of them stumbled, and the candles didn't go out. And at least they came to where they could see a little door in the brick wall on the right. This was no, there was no bolt or handle on this side of it, of course, for the door had been made um, to getting to, not to getting out. But there was a catch, as there often is on the inside of a cupboard door, which they felt sure they would be able to turn. Shall I? Said Digroy. I'm game if you are, said Polly. Just as she had said before, both felt that it was becoming very serious, but neither would draw back. Digroy pushed around the catch with some difficulty. The door swung open, and a sudden daylight made them blink. Then, with a great shock, they saw that they were looking not into a deserted attic, but into a furnished room. But it seemed empty enough. It was dead silent. Polly's curiosity got the better of her. She blew out her candle and stepped out onto the strange floor, making no more noise than a mouse. It was shaped of course, like an attic, but furnished as a sitting room. Every bit of the walls were lined with shelves, and every bit of the shelves were full of books. A fire was burning in the gate. You remember that it was very cold, yet a cold, wet summer that year, and in front of the fireplace was its back against them was a high backed armchair. Between the chair and Polly, and filling most of the middle of the room, was a big table piled with all sorts of things, printed books and books of sorts you write in, and ink bottles and pens, and sealing wax and a microscope. But what she noticed first was a bright red woolen tray with a number of things on it. They were in pairs, a yellow one and a green one together, then a small space, and then another yellow one and another green one. They were no bigger than an ordinary rings, and no one could help noticing them because they were so bright. They were the most beautiful, shiny little things you can imagine. If Polly had been a very little younger, she would have wanted to put one in her mouth. The room was so quiet that you noticed the ticking of the clock at once, and yet, as she now um, found, it was not absolutely quiet either. There was a very, very faint humming sound. It, if vacuum cleaners could have invented in those days, Polly would have thought it was the sound of a Hoover being worked a long way away off, several rooms away and several floors below. But it was a nicer, but it was a nicer sound than that. A more musical tone, only so faint that you could hardly hear it. It's all right, there's no one here, said Polly over her shoulder to Digroy. She was speaking with above a whisper now, and Digroy came out, blinking and looking extremely dirty. So indeed Polly was too. This is no good, he said. It's not an empty house at all. We'd better leave before anyone comes. What do you think these are? Said Polly, pointing to the colored rings. Oh, come on, said Digroy. The sooner. He never finished what he was going to say, for at that moment something happened. The high backed chair in front of the fire moved suddenly, and there rose up out of it like a demon coming up out of the trapdoor, an alarming form of Uncle Andrew. He was not in the empty house at all. They were in Digroy's house, and in the forbidden study. Both children said, "Oh," and realized their terrible mistake. They felt they ought to have known all along that they hadn't gone nearly far enough. Uncle Arthur was tall and very thin. He had a long, clean shaved face with a sharp, pointed nose and extremely bright eyes and a giant tousled mop of gray hair. Diggory was quite speechless, for Uncle Andrew looked 1,000 times more alarming than he had ever looked before. Polly was not so frightened yet, but she soon was, for the very first thing Andrew did was to walk across the door to the door of the room, shut it, and turn the key in the lock. Then he turned around, fixed the children with his bright eyes, and smiled, showing all his teeth. There, he said, now my fool of a sister can't get to you. Ooh, I wonder what that's all about. It was dreadfully unlike anything a grown-up would have expected to do. Polly's heart came into her mouth, and she and Digroy started backing towards the little door they had come in by. Uncle Arthur was too quick for them. He got behind them and shut that door too, and stood in front of it. Then he rubbed his hands and made his knuckles crack. He had very long, beautiful white fingers. I am delighted to see you, he said. Two children are just what I wanted. Please, Mr. Kettlroy, said Polly, it's nearly my dinner time and I've got to get home. Will you please let us out? Not just yet, said Uncle Andrew. This is too good of an opportunity to miss. I wanted two children, you see. I'm in the middle of a great experiment. I've tried it on guinea pigs, and it seemed to work. But then the guinea pig didn't tell you anything, and you couldn't explain to it how it came back. Look here, Uncle Andrew, said Digroy. It's really is dinner time, and they'll be looking for us in in a moment. You must be you must let us out. Must, said Uncle Arthur, said Andrew. Digroy and Polly glanced at one another. They dared not say anything, but the glances meant, isn't this dreadful? And we must humor him. If you let us go for our dinner now, said Polly, we could come back after dinner. Uh, but how do I know that you would? Said Uncle Andrew, with a cunning smile. Then he seemed to change his mind. Well, well, he said. If you really must go, I suppose you must. I can't expect two youngsters like you to find it much fun to take in an old buffer like me, talking to an old buffer like me. He sighed and went on. You're not idea. You've no idea how lonely I sometimes am. But no matter. Go to your dinner. But I must give you a present before you go. It's not every day that I see a little girl in my dingy old study, especially if I may say so, such a very attractive young lady as yourself. Polly began to think he might not really be mad after all. Wouldn't you like a ring, my dear? Said Uncle Andrew to Polly. Do you mean one of those yellow or green ones? Said Polly. How lovely. No, not a green one, said Uncle Andrew. I'm afraid I can't give you the green one away. Can't give the green ones away. But I'd be delighted to give you one of the yellow ones. With my love. Come and try it on. Polly had now quite got over the fright and felt sure that he did gentle that he that the old gentleman was not mad, and there was certainly something strangely attractive about those bright rings. She moved over to the tray. Why, I dare, she said. Why, I declare, she said. The humming voice gets louder here. It's almost as if the rings were making it. But a funny, what a funny fancy, what a funny fancy, my dear, said Uncle Andrew, with a laugh. It sounded very unnatural laugh, but Diggory had seen any eager, almost a greedy look on his face. Polly, don't be a fool, he shouted. Don't touch them. But it was too late. Exactly as he spoke, Polly's hand went out to touch one of the rings, and immediately, within a flash or a noise or a warning of any sort, there was no Polly. Digroy and his uncle were alone in the room. Wow, I think that's chapter one. Wow, I wonder what happened to Polly. This is kind of mysterious. Well, I asked you to try to keep in mind on who the main characters are. So definitely we know that it's Polly and it's Digroy and also Uncle Arthur, Uncle Andrew. I always do that, don't I? Because I had an Uncle Arthur, and that's why I keep thinking of. Okay, so I'm going to take a little I'm going to take a little note card, and I'm going to write down who the main characters are. Okay, and just a little short description of them so that we can actually keep track of what we're doing in this story. Okay, Polly. She's one of the main characters, right? So I'm going to write main MC for main character. So Polly and Diggory, Polly's very curious. I'm going to write curious. And Diggory is a little boy. And he came to stay with his aunt and uncle. Okay, then Uncle Andrew which is a scientist, and Diggory's uncle. Okay, so those are our three main characters. So that's the first chapter of the book, and I think it's definitely pulled me in. Kind of wonder where they're going. They're going to Narnia? Could be. But I know if I was a little girl, I would be trying to find those. I would have found those passages in the attic too, and I would have been exploring. And I probably would have not gone as far as I did. I think it's fun to go exploring. So I would have been right with them. All right. I will see you in a couple days when I read another chapter. Bye.